Welcome, everyone. Hello. Everybody wave if you can see me. Welcome. We are thrilled that you are here today and joining us for this virtual forum, a conversation with AIDS memorial leaders, pulling the thread of resilience from the past to today. We are honored to have with us leaders in the AIDS movement whose collective voices have inspired not only activism, but have also been important voices within their respective memorial communities in helping remember lost loved ones, honoring activists and caretakers, and inspiring future generations through their work and the memorials they represent. Joining us for our panel discussion today is John Cunningham, Executive Director of the National AIDS Memorial, Dave Harper, Executive Director of the New York City AIDS Memorial, Jason Plourde, Project Manager for the AMP, AIDS Memorial Pathways Seattle, Tony Valenzuela, Executive Director of the Foundation for the AIDS Monument in Los Angeles, and Richard Zaldivar, Founder and CEO of the Wall Las Memorias Project. John, Dave, Jason, Tony, and Richard have formed a collaborative group of AIDS memorial organizations, which they hope will grow to include other memorials as a way to work together and share how to remember and tell the story of HIV and AIDS. They will each share the work of their memorials and answer questions from the audience as part of this panel discussion. But first, it really is my honor to welcome Cleve Jones, a well-known figure in the AIDS movement, who has agreed to open today's forum. As an AIDS and LGBT activist, author, and founder of the AIDS Memorial Quilt, the largest community arts project in the world, and most recognizable symbol of activism and remembrance, Cleve has been a powerful voice of inspiration and remembrance. His latest book, When We Rise, chronicles his life as an activist, not just in the AIDS and LGBTQ movement, but someone who speaks out for those who have not been heard. Today, Cleve will share his perspective on the importance of memorials for those who have lost and for the survivors. He will also provide his views on how memorials serve as markers in history for activism and to ensure that we always remember. Thank you, Cleve, for being here with us today and sharing your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, all of you who are joining us this evening. I'm speaking to you from Guerneville, California, about 90 minutes north of San Francisco, and I've been sheltering in place here since the first week of March. It's a beautiful place, but it is not that removed from the reality of the new pandemic. And I'm grateful to be here, grateful to be in the company of such fine people who are doing work that I think has now become even more important than we already knew it was. So I want to begin actually by thanking John Cunningham and everyone from the AIDS Memorial Grove in San Francisco who worked so hard to bring the AIDS Memorial Quilt back to San Francisco from Atlanta. I also need to acknowledge absolutely the work of the late Representative John Lewis and Speaker Pelosi in making that transfer happen. I think most of you are aware that that has occurred. I think one thing you may not all know is that the Quilt's archives, which consists of over 250,000 pieces, is now in the care of the Library of Congress. And these are letters that accompany quilt panels, all sorts of ephemera from displays and chapters around the United States and across the world. And it made me feel so good to know that the material is being preserved for researchers in the future to get an extraordinary glimpse into what life was like during those, especially those terrible years of the HIV/AIDS pandemic before effective treatments became available. Just last night, I got an email from a woman in Burlingame, California, 71 years old, who said that a family member was sick with COVID, and the family was on a Zoom chat talking about how to arrange for care and the rest of it. And in the course of that conversation, she reminded them that her younger brother, a young man named Mark Ryan, had died of AIDS in San Francisco. And she asked me if she wanted to know if I knew him, sent me a photograph of him. And I recognized him immediately as one of the gang that we'd hung out with probably a couple of years before we began the AIDS quilt. I think this is something all of us need to be aware of, that a new generation is coming up that has no personal experience of those terrible times when so many people were dying of AIDS, but they want to know about it. And it's important that they know about it. And the lessons that we learned then are so relevant today as we face this new pandemic. So this is not just about preserving some dusty chapters of a sad history. It's about arming people for the present struggle and for struggles to come. I had the idea for the quilt on the night of November 27th, 1985. I'm sure many of you have heard the story. It was the anniversary of the murders of Harvey Milk and George Moscone. We were reenacting the candlelight march that happened the night the two men were murdered. And it was the same week that we'd learned that over 1,000 San Franciscans had already been killed by this new disease. I knew many of them. Many of them were my neighbors and friends, and some of them were the most extraordinary characters, really unique and wonderful individuals. And I was overwhelmed by two driving emotions. One was grief and the fear that these remarkable people, these beautiful people, would be forgotten and lost to history. And the other part of that, the more external part of that, was a just burning desire to warn the world of what was coming. And so I think there's always been a duality to all of our work, all of you who are doing this. There's the part about preserving the past, but there's also the understanding that that past is important to the present and the future. And many people over many generations have stated this in different ways, but if we're not aware of our past, if we don't understand what happened, we're going to keep making the same old mistakes. And once again, here we are. I think that looking back at it, there were so many parts of it that I didn't anticipate. I thought of it as a memorial and a way to help people grieve. I found in my own self and in so many of my friends at the time that we were really becoming paralyzed by grief. There was just too much death, too much suffering every single day, memorials every day. And we needed to find a way collectively to process that grief so that we could continue the struggle. I also saw it as a weapon, a way to shame the government for its inaction, a way to show them a visible representation of the consequences of their failure. I saw it as a tool for the media to illustrate the lives that were behind the statistics. And I don't think that I was ever prepared for the beauty of it, though, the artistry. And I still can't sew. This quilt was sewn together largely by a woman named Gert McMullen, who is still with us. She's sewing masks these days for frontline workers. But that was one thing that still I find remarkable, is just how much beauty and love is poured into these individual quilt panels. And I think that is really the basis of the power of that project. And I think that the quilt, even today, makes a very radical statement. And I think that's part of what all of you are doing in your own work. We're saying that these lives mattered, that these were all people who may have been rejected or worse by society, people who came from all walks of life, but whose lives mattered. And even though many of them will never be celebrated or read about, they mattered. They had families and friends and neighbors and colleagues who loved them very much. And as we move forward with this new pandemic, I think that's a very important message, that all these lives must be defended. And the most vulnerable among us in particular, those who have been marginalized, those who have been silenced, must find a voice and their struggles must be remembered. So that's a big part of my life today is having so many people reach out to me to want to talk about those parallels between the two pandemics. And I'm going to be very interested to see how the people who are surviving this current one will choose to remember those that they have lost. And I think we can help them do that. So I'll shut up now and I look forward to this conversation. And it's good to see so many of you. Hi, Richard. Hi, Leslie. Hi, John. And thank you very much for allowing me to participate.
Thank you, Cleve. Thank you. That was inspiring and moving and done in a way that only you can do. So thank you. That's we appreciate you being here with us today. And your remarks really provide a foundation for our next discussion about AIDS memorials as we take a deeper dive into the purpose and the importance of remembering lost loved ones. We hope this conversation, one of our goals is to discuss the importance of examining the history of AIDS memorials within the broader fight of the HIV epidemic. Our panel members will discuss the various approaches to memorialize, educate, and empower those living with or affected with HIV/AIDS so that the stories and the lessons of the epidemic are not forgotten. Also, we hope to expand the historical narratives of memorialization to be inclusive of diverse histories and acknowledge contemporary social justice, public health, and related movements. So, to start things off, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to provide a brief overview of their organization and their work and mission around the communities that they serve. John, if you could kick us off, please. We can't hear you, John. One more time.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. Perfect.
Okay, sorry. You'd think over the last 6 months on Zoom, I would have figured this out by now, right? Thank you, SB, for stepping in and helping us with this. And Cleve, thank you for your great remarks and for all the work and inspiration you've given to so many over the years. My name is John Cunningham. I'm the Executive Director of the National AIDS Memorial. And it is my honor to be joined by my partners from the other 4 memorials that have been working for the last year and a half to create this collaborative. If I may just take a moment and ask all of us to take a moment and hold in our hearts the name and spirit and memory of a lost loved one that has brought us to this call. That's what we do, and that's who we remember, and that is our primary purpose of what we do. So if we could just take a moment and hold in our hearts the memory. Thank you. The National AIDS Memorial, or as Cleve referred to it by its original and common name, the AIDS Memorial Grove in Golden Gate Park, was conceived actually in the year that the quilt was founded. So it was 29 years ago now, when a small group of San Franciscans, much like Cleve and his cohorts, joined together in the face of incredible loss and devastation, seeking a way in which they could not only memorialize their lost loved ones, but also could join together to create something that would have lasting impact on society. I think it speaks to the fact of what was happening in San Francisco, as was the case in many of the other cities that are represented here today. The devastation and the loss and the dark cloud that hung over our city and many other major metropolitan areas, that the leaders of the city of San Francisco gave 10 acres of its crown jewel park system of Golden Gate Park to yet to be formed organization for the purpose of remembering the lives of those lost. It speaks to the incredible devastation that was happening in all aspects and all parts of our community. So they settled on a space in Golden Gate Park that was known as the Delaviagadel, which was a neglected and abandoned and forgotten part of the park. In some ways, much like those young boys in the early days that it was memorializing, who had ventured to San Francisco or to other cities to find themselves, to be themselves, and to find a village and create a village to move on. In the first 6 months that the groups gathered for work days, there were over 65 dump truck loads of debris that was hauled away to clear the space for what is today our nation's only memorial to HIV and AIDS that is federally designated. The National AIDS Memorial, or the AIDS Memorial Grove as it was called back then, brought together hundreds of volunteers on a monthly basis to help clear brush, prepare the land, and most importantly, to share their collective grief and to find in each other hope to go on into the future. Because those of us, and I have seen many faces that I recognize who have lived through this, there was a period where there was no hope. There was a period where individuals that were living with HIV and AIDS were referred to as victims, or themselves that called themselves victims. And there was a time that the community needed to come together and to create a space where they could heal. So that work began, and in the first 4 years, the hardscape features began to be built. At the core of the memorial in the early years and to this day are the work days of bringing communities together, because that's what this was forged around, of bringing communities and individuals together to create not only a space, but in the process of working on either side of the shovel and learning about each other is to create hope for the future. The quilt in its own journey was created in San Francisco, obviously, as well. And it went out across the country, again, to teach and to inform, but most importantly, to force themselves and force the nation to open their eyes. In 1996, through an act of Congress that was signed into law by President Clinton, the AIDS Memorial Grove was designated as our nation's only federally designated memorial. And since that time, this organization has expanded its programmatic offerings to ensure that we inspire and support young activists in our communities through the Pedro Zamora Young Leaders Scholarship Program and the Mary Bowman Arts in Activism. The Surviving Voices Oral History Project, which is documenting the oral history of communities and populations, from the trans community to women to the hemophilia community. This year, the camera will focus on those that use drugs and substance users. And then also, the organization has continued to expand its programmatic offerings, as Cleve mentioned, by bringing the quilt into its portfolio. This organization is committed to ensuring that all those lives lost, the 750,000, nearly 750,000 around this nation, are not forgotten. But most importantly, that they did not die in vain. And that is the work that we must all do together, because it is the story not only of those individual lives, but it is also the story of tragedy and discrimination and prejudice and stigma and marginalization that caused so much death and destruction that was unnecessary. And on the other side of that coin, it is the story of activism and compassion and love and spirit and community that must be shared with future generations, so we don't find ourselves in the place that we do today, because we are repeating the mistakes of our past. So the National AIDS Memorial has long seen as its primary focus to remember those lives, but to also create space to convene and collaborate with others. And over the last year and a half, it has been such an honor to work with these other partners that are doing groundbreaking work in their own communities to memorialize the lives lost, because I see that our power, our growth as individual organizations is only magnified by working together and to support others. Because whether it be New York or whether it be Iowa City, we must allow people to remember those lives lost that were forgotten for so many years. So again, thank you all for joining today, and I look forward to a very good conversation.
Hi, I'm Dave Harper. I'm the executive director of the New York City AIDS Memorial here in New York. The memorial, unlike the National AIDS Memorial here, was founded as a grassroots effort in 2011, so much later than many of our compatriots in this group. And it was founded by two young men who did not know a world without AIDS, much like me. There had been several attempts at creating a memorial in New York City to the 100,000 New Yorkers we had lost, but nothing as architecturally significant or important or as centrally located as this space had existed. Our memorial was ultimately dedicated in 2016 on World AIDS Day, and is located on the campus of the former St. Vincent's Hospital, which was for many years New York and the East Coast first and largest AIDS ward. So today we now have a staff of 1. We're growing, and the mandate of our organization is to not only remember and reflect on those who we've lost, but also to celebrate and honor the work of caretakers and activists who fought alongside those lost to AIDS. And we do this primarily today through educational and cultural programming on site, much of which has been unfortunately put on pause for the short term, but we'll be bringing back a lot of, I think, interesting, dynamic and exciting and moving programs to the memorial, which is in Greenwich Village. I've been with the organization only about a year now, and 6 months of that has been during the current pandemic. So a lot of the ways we're thinking about how to do the work we're doing has been colored by our current situation. And it's really interesting. For so many years into the epidemic, there wasn't a significant memorial in New York, and there's already been a discussion about building a COVID-19 memorial on Hart Island, which has served for many years as kind of the pauper cemetery for the city, and contains a lot of burials of people who lost to AIDS who were abandoned by their family or didn't have a means to be buried elsewhere. So I think that's really interesting today to think about how this act of building and creating and memorializing these different periods of time in our histories and our communities is something that seems to be speeding up rather than slowing down. And I look forward to sharing more with you all, and I really look forward to continuing the work we've been doing, the 5 of us together, in making sure that we are thinking of all the different ways and the important ways to memorialize those lost to HIV and AIDS, and to continue the fight in ending the epidemic and acknowledging its ongoingness as we move forward.
Thanks, Dave. My name is Jason Plourde, and I'm the project manager for the AMP, the AIDS Memorial Pathway in Seattle. Our project started as an idea at the end of 2015, so we're still building, still not quite a completed memorial yet. The idea was inspired by the AIDS memorials represented at this meeting today, and as well as many others. And the community group assembled to complete the memorial, established 3 goals right off the bat, and that was to use public art to create a physical place for reflection and remembrance, to utilize technology to share stories about the epidemic and the diverse community responses to the crisis, and provide a call to action to end HIV, AIDS, stigma, and discrimination. And what you're seeing now are a lot of renderings, some of the completed artwork, but also renderings of the artwork that is intended to be created on site. The physical site for the AMP is on Capitol Hill in Seattle, and it extends from the plaza above the light rail station through to the north edge of Cal Anderson Park. It's a very meaningful location because Capitol Hill has long been the center of the LGBTQ community in Seattle. And in the 80s and 90s especially, many AIDS service organizations were based within blocks of the site where the AMP will be. Also, the park, the adjacent park, Cal Anderson Park, is named for the first openly gay elected official in Washington State who died of AIDS in the mid-90s. So there are there's a lot of components to the AMP. There's multiple emotional attributes, and we've commissioned multiple artists to create 4 artworks, which you saw in the slideshow there, throughout the pathway. And yeah, initially we had planned to be completed by the end of this year, but we now expect to be done in early 2021. In addition to the physical artworks that will be on site, we have a website which includes a collection of stories, interviews that we're building, doing community outreach to get various folks talking about their experiences with HIV and AIDS historically, but also contemporarily. And we're also planning to do an app so that people can engage digitally through experiences connected with the physical artworks and get information and access to resources through their phones and other digital devices. Okay, so that's what we're doing, and we, like I said, we hope to be complete by early next year.
Thank you, Jason. My name is Tony Valenzuela. I'm the executive director of the Foundation for the AIDS Monument in Los Angeles, West Hollywood. Our monument is called Stories, the AIDS Monument. So I'm going to speak briefly about what we're doing right now at Stories. I want to quickly thank SB, the great Cleve Jones, my esteemed colleagues on this panel and our audience for joining us for this conversation. So first, the mission of Stories, the AIDS Monument, is to remember our loved ones lost to HIV/AIDS, celebrate the activists and caregivers that got us through our darkest days and continue to work to end the pandemic, and educate the public, especially younger generations, about what happened so that it never happens again. Stories, the AIDS Monument, has been a labor of love and passion among our board members and City of West Hollywood for many years. It was founded about a decade ago by Craig Doherty, Jason Kennedy, a couple of our board members, the West Hollywood City Councilman, John Duran, among others, and incorporated about 5 years ago to begin to raise money through a capital campaign to build the monument. You can see right now that these are renders of the monument that are appearing on your screen. This year, we reached an important, incredible milestone of completing our fundraising for the capital campaign. And now, as an organization, we've embarked on developing the programs that will enact our mission. So Stories is among the memorials represented here today, like AMP in Seattle, that is not yet built. Our monument, which will be located in West Hollywood Park, in the neighborhood where the beginning of the response to the epidemic in LA County started. Our monument is estimated to begin construction next summer of 2021, and hold a dedication event by the end of 2021. Our monument is based on a grid inspired by the quilt. It is a field. It's on a 7,000 square foot plot of land. It will be a field of what we call traces. These are 15-foot tall bronze pylons, which become denser as you move through the monument site. The site has tablets that have historical narratives about the local and national epidemics, and various tablets with quotes from important artists and activists that we lost to AIDS. There's also, because the site, which is on San Vicente Boulevard between Melrose and Santa Monica Boulevard, that has historically been a site of mobilization in LA for protests in the queer community. And so our monument actually has a built-in protest podium that's already going to be wired for sound as a future site of mobilization. Even though our monument is yet to be built, we have already started doing some work. For example, we've produced original videos about, that are sort of testimonial videos about the epidemic in Los Angeles and nationally. And we've engaged over the last couple of years on some important community conversations about, for example, the impact of AIDS on Hollywood, the impact of AIDS on the music industry, on the impact of AIDS in the African-American community. So we are going to be developing more of our programming now that we've transitioned to this new phase. And I really look forward to working with community to help us develop exactly what we're going to be doing in LA. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Richard Zaldivar. I'm the executive director and the founder of the Las Memorias project. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for being on this Zoom call. I want to thank ESPY, and I also want to thank my staff members, Miguel Villegas and Andres Magaña, who helped put this event together. The Las Memorias is a community health and wellness organization dedicated to serving Latino, LGBTQ, and other underserved populations through advocacy, education, in building the next generation of leadership. I remember so well back in the early 1990s that I would often be confronted by some AIDS activists, always questioning about when are you Latinos going to get your act together about HIV? And, you know, kind of like I thought about that. And then my best friend tested for HIV. And I remember the tremendous stigma that he associated with at that time. And it really bothered me. And I, being an activist, a community and political activist for my entire life, I wanted to make a difference. And so I founded this organization with an idea of building one wall panel with the Virgin Mary in the middle of an art mural, and then the names of 200 people who died. So I put together a committee, and that committee consisted of queer people, community folks, parents who lost someone to AIDS, and a Catholic priest. And within 3 months, we became a nonprofit organization. And the original architectural design was created within that 3 months. And on December the 1st, 1993, we became the Las Memorias project. And so we had to do a lot of organizing in our community. So we rolled up our sleeves and started bringing together different groups, different folks, different organizations, different parents. We brought together Latino celebrities. We brought together elected officials. And so in 2000, the state of California passed a request, a member's request from a state assembly member to help fund the AIDS monument in the amount of $400,000. And then we went, raised more money from the foundations and from the city of Los Angeles. And we dedicated our first AIDS monument on December the 1st, 2004, in front of 1,500 people. Today, we're in the process of renovating that monument with the assistance of the city of Los Angeles and again, the county of Los Angeles, making it the first AIDS monument, publicly funded monument in the country that has received money from several levels of government. And within 4 weeks, this monument, the renovation, will be completed, located in Los Angeles at Lincoln Park in Northeast LA, in the hub of the Latino community. The Las Memorias is for a place where people could remember their loved ones, their memories. But it's also important that this is an opportunity that we are able to organize community around the conversation of stigma, denial, HIV/AIDS, sexuality, and truth. I am so proud of the amazing amount of board members and the staff members that we have today. Our organization has approximately 30 staff members. We provide HIV prevention and testing to gay men, bisexual men, and transgender. We also provide health prevention, mental health and substance abuse prevention. And we do capacity building around developing leaders in the Boyle Heights community with 35 other nonprofit organizations. We are also an advocacy organization because we have learned if we were able to organize the community, which we did, we're able to organize Los Angeles and organize politics and government so it better serves our community and our constituency. I'm so happy that this AIDS monument, the Las Memorias, has been recognized nationally, also internationally, as we have received many names for the AIDS monument from many parts of Latin America. It is the Las Memorias that has brought together the community and created a safer space for people to talk and accept people for who they are. The Wallace Memorias project will be dedicated sometime after the first of the year, once we get past our first hurdle in fighting this COVID disease. So with that, I just want to thank everyone who's on the Zoom link today in this conversation. And know that as we move forward, what's really important is that the lessons that oftentimes I go and speak to schools and students at colleges and universities. And I tell them that the Wallace Memorias is about believing in dreams. As I dreamt about this in 1993, with the help of the community and with the God above me, we were able to do this. But it's also about working the community and bridging out and bringing people in to participate in a project. Because I really do believe that we will end HIV/AIDS, but it won't be because of one person. It will be because of all of us. So thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you all for sharing the important work that you do. It's a reminder of how far we have come, but also of how far and how much work we still have to do. These AIDS memorials bring to light many of the issues we face today. Now, I'd like to moderate some questions from our panelists, and we'd like to invite audience members, all of you out there on your Zoom calls, join us, send us your questions via the chat feature. I see that some of you have already started submitting some questions. That's wonderful, keep them coming. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can. I think our first question here is for John. John, could you tell us how, over the years, the focus and mission of your organization, the National AIDS Memorial, has changed or evolved as the AIDS epidemic has changed over the years?
Great, unmuted. Thank you to all of my colleagues for their great remarks. So for all of us on this call that have lived through it and those that have not necessarily lived through it but are growing to know it, the chapters of the AIDS struggle and crisis are very diverse. From the early days where there was, no hope, there was no treatment. We were having to travel to Mexico to get drugs to help experiment, to protease coming out in the mid to late 90s and the change that brought upon us. I think that it's also, for our organization, we were originally created as a space of remembrance, because I think it's important that we all know that this is about memory. We all are holding memory, and memory is about memorialization, and memorialization and memory are about never forgetting. The organization, as it's looked at through itself over the years, was originally created as a space for the community to gather and to heal in nature, and the power of nature cannot be underestimated. As the organization continued to grow and evolve, it became important that we reach out to the future generations, those that follow us, to share the stories, to share the legacy, and to make sure that the torch is passed to those that follow, so they can carry on the work, not only around HIV and AIDS, but what it means to be a member of society. And that was the birth of the Pedro Zamora Young Leaders Scholarship Program, which has supported young leaders on college campuses across this country who are doing groundbreaking social justice, HIV and AIDS prevention, reproductive rights, and the like across this country. We've supported nearly $500,000 worth of scholarships to young people. And the power of the work that's going on can't be underestimated. Storytelling is how we keep the lives of those that we remember alive, by telling their stories. That's how their life continues. So we started about 8 years ago, the Story Project, and it has evolved into what's known as the Surviving Voices Project. 2 years ago, we were approached by another nonprofit, the HIV Story Project, to acquire them and bring them into our portfolio because the founders, who were both filmmakers, felt that we could continue to help to expand that reach and to share those stories, not only nationally, but globally. As Cleve shared most recently, we've expanded by bringing the quilt into our community. That will take us from the space that is the 10 acres in Golden Gate Park and allow us to take the quilt both out in its fabric form, all 52 tons, all 50,000 panels, and all 100,000 plus individuals that are memorialized. But I think it's also most important for us to realize that we have an obligation as AIDS memorials and as individuals that lived through it to be truth tellers. There are too few truth tellers that have the courage to stand up and to tell the truth about what's going on around them. So this organization is committed to telling the truth about what happened in the epidemic, what happened to the communities, what the government did and didn't do. Because that's the power that we have to honor and remember those lives that have lost, that we continue to gather together to memorialize. We must ensure that social justice and health justice and access to healthcare, stigmatization of different populations and community is at the forefront of what we do. Because again, the AIDS crisis sat at the intersection of so many social justice movements. It sat at the intersection of LGBT, of access to healthcare, of communities of color, of those that did not have the funds, of poverty, homelessness. All of those intersected in this particular crisis, which is unique. And we must carry that mantle on. So we are committed as an organization to picking up that torch and to ensuring that the stories of those lost are not forgotten, but that we do what was done in the early days. And we're committed to improving the communities that we live in through being honest and telling the truth and making sure that everybody is treated equally.
Thank you, John. That's a great answer. We have a question from Lonnie Lusardo, and this question is for all of our panel members. So maybe if we can start with Richard and make our way in back order. Can each panelist please describe the funding sources for their projects? How much from the government, corporations, and other funders?
So I'll start. Thank you, Esme. Good question. As I had mentioned before, we are funded primarily through government funding from the County of Los Angeles in the area. This time around for the renovation, $350,000. From the City of Los Angeles, $500,000. And so people would say, well, why did you get money from the city and the county? Well, because, you know, initially when we started building the monument, there was so much competition among AIDS organizations. It was so political. That's number one. And number two is, if we're going to create social change, then we have to start with our elected officials who are elected by the people in the community. So in order to do that, we have to have relationships with elected officials. Then we have to get community support. And so when you're talking about communities who normally wouldn't talk about HIV/AIDS or kind of shun it, it's important then we create the opportunity for the outreach. So we were able to do that in a number of different ways in order to get the support from the city and county to support an AIDS monument. And then lastly, about the funding, I think it's important. It's awesome when you have city officials in Los Angeles, one of the largest cities in the country, to be able to say, we have an AIDS monument in Lincoln Park. Or the county supervisor, who was a former secretary of labor, Hilda Solis, to say, we're renovating our AIDS monument on the northeast side of Los Angeles. And so that's part of the awareness, and that's part of the community empowerment that's so important for us to end this epidemic of HIV. So good question, thanks.
So yeah, for us, you know, it's a healthy mix of government, foundation, corporate, and individual supporters. The City of West Hollywood has been the largest and a tremendous support to this project. In addition to giving at least $500,000, they've also, you know, provided the land for the monument site, will maintain it in perpetuity, and will be an ongoing partner around programming. So other kinds of funders include, for example, Cedars-Sinai, and just many of the foundations you might expect that would support an AIDS memorial like this one. I think what's really important to note is that it's really been a community effort, that there have been a lot of individuals and folks, in addition to the city of West Hollywood, LA County, and the state of California. So that's really a show of the widespread support for this kind of work. Yeah, thank you.
Jason?
In 2016, when the project started, there was a budget put together for the entire project to completion, and that was about 2.8 million. It's a collaboratively funded project, like Tony just mentioned. So we had a couple members of our steering committee identify how we were going to get to that goal, and they've led the efforts really to put half of that fundraising towards municipal and government funding, and half of that into private funding, so individuals and companies. And that strategy has worked out pretty well. We've gotten significant funding from the state, from the county, and from the city of Seattle to build half of our budget. And then some corporate funding, grants and foundations as well have been really important to building our goal. And then, yeah, individuals have stepped up, and families and individuals that have been really generous. So we're almost at the completion of our fundraising. We're this close. But yeah, it's a challenge, and particularly now this year we're hoping, but we're within $300,000 of making our goal, and so we've got a challenge ahead of us.
So our memorial cost in the end about $6.5 million to build, which just shows how much more expensive it is to do things in New York City than it is to do things elsewhere. About half that money came from the state and the city of New York, and the other half came from mostly individual donors, with a couple of foundations and corporations tied in. Once the memorial was completed, the memorial was built in a park that was part of the former St. Vincent's campus that was developed by a condominium developer, and we developed about 1/10 of it as our memorial. The developer and us and the memorial organization then gifted the park and the memorial back to the city. So today the memorial is part of a New York City park called the New York City AIDS Memorial Park at St. Vincent's Triangle, but the maintenance of the memorial, utilities and general maintenance of it, is our responsibility as an organization. So that's an ongoing fundraising challenge, because it's not the most sexy thing to ask for money for, sweeping leaves and turning on and off lights, but that's part of the work that we do now when we're fundraising. And yeah, we were able to make that goal between about 2011 and 2016. So it was a pretty huge accomplishment for the board, who really started with, it was two young guys with about a couple grand from their friends and an idea that within the span of 5 years, they'd raised enough to complete the memorial.
The National AIDS Memorial, or the AIDS Memorial Grove, I think sits a bit uniquely in the funding process. We are 100% privately funded through private and corporate foundations, as well as the generosity of individuals. We have at one time received a gift from the state of California for the final hardscape construction of the original master plan of a little over $250,000 from Carol Mignon when she was treasurer of the assessor of the state. And the reason that was the case from its early days is, and we actually have a number of the early day ACT UP individuals on our board today, one of which was board chair up until a couple of years ago, Mike Shriver. There was great consternation that we were coming onto the scene and looking at constructing something that would have sucked a lot of money off the top that would have otherwise perhaps gone directly to those that we're providing direct services from city funding mainly. So the organization in its early years made the decision strategically not to take public money. That will change as we continue to grow. We've got some significant big plans on the horizon that will ensure that these stories and the social justice issues that I've spoken of will have a space in which those can be shared. But I think it's also important that we, like some of our partner agencies, are a very unique public-private partnership. When the city and county of San Francisco gave us the 99-year lease for the 10.5 acres in Golden Gate Park, we made a commitment that we would pay for 100% of all the improvements, which to date is about what the New York City Memorial cost, is about $6.5 million. But we've also built up an endowment to secure and ensure that the maintenance of this memorial will be maintained in perpetuity. And because as we know, the memorial, the site that we took over, the Zaldivar Gadel, was in disrepair because of budget cuts. And we never wanted this memorial site to be placed on budget chopping block in the event the economic downturn would create that. So we've amassed an endowment that will secure it into the future. And we're in the process now with the quilt of wanting to do the same, to ensure that the quilt itself will have an endowment to ensure that in perpetuity it as well will always be preserved. So each year we have to re-up and raise the money to keep the organization going. It continues to grow the budget, obviously with the quilt coming and the need there. And when we expand our footprint and we look to the future of creating a space in which the story of health justice, social justice, and global health and pandemics will be shared, I am sure that we will be expanding out into the government realm. Today is different than it was 29 years ago. Anything 29 years ago that would have had AIDS attached to it would have sucked money off the top.
Yeah, thank you. That's very good answers, and we appreciate the candid and sharing that information. We have Nino Testa, who says, I can imagine people had a very different feelings about what Memorial should look like. How did you build buy-in for Memorial among diverse stakeholders in your city? How did you structure opportunity for community feedback? Jason, you want to take that one? I think that might be up your alley, and we'll see what the rest of the team has to say.
Thanks, SP. So we partner with many organizations. So from the start of the AMP, we formed a community action group, which was initially like 35 members and now has almost twice that on its roster. There's representatives from different community organizations that are a part of it. The artists did outreach to communities and individuals as they were developing their concepts. We've had 2 public forums. We regularly, through the community action group, get feedback that way. So you know, as any organization, I'm sure would attest, there's always room to do more, and you can, you know, never be doing enough to connect with people in communities. But we've done that regularly. Also, when we started, as I mentioned earlier, we knew we were going to have a physical place for the memorial, but then also this digital space that was going to collect video stories. And we've done that. And the initial grant to do those recordings was focused specifically on communities of color, because we knew we wanted to lead in that way, because communities of color, particularly Black communities, have been disproportionately impacted by HIV and AIDS, and yet often underrepresented. And so we wanted to make sure that we led with story collection efforts that were going to get individuals who could talk about that experience and give a sense of the histories that they've experienced. So we're doing a lot to lead in that way with racial equity up front, and we're continuing to do that. So we hope that engagement not only has we've done that, but that we will continue doing that.
Does anybody want to add to that and share some of their experience in building that sense of community and involving different stakeholders?
Sure. Okay. I could just add that we also, like Jason, our organization created a community kind of council, mostly of AIDS service organizations in New York, which we have many, and other community organizations that had input in what we were doing. The design of the memorial was also an open call. It was a kind of democratic process. People from all over the world submitted entries as to what it would look like. There were about 450 entries, and then we had a panel made up of community leaders from both AIDS and AIDS service organizations, AIDS activists, architectural and landscape designers, and art world folks, including directors of major New York City museums, who ultimately settled on what the project should look like. What was chosen at that point in 2012 is not what is built today. It is the same designers that were chosen, but through a lot of review processes with the city, with our community board, with the developers that were developing the park alongside the memorial, ultimately the design shifted several times to get something that really felt right for all of the stakeholders. And I think accomplishes that beautifully, although it doesn't look anything like what it was meant to start as. And I think that's there's a lot of that in building something that is in the community, that is for a community, that is in a public space. You really need to make sure that everyone around you in the neighborhood, in the community of activists and of workers at ASOs, in the government and across the board feel like they have a stake in what ultimately this place will be, because it's for them, it's for all of us. So that's just a little bit about what we went through.
I just wanted to add in and answer some of this question. You know, for us, when we talk about how did you bring stakeholders together, a little short story. When we first started building the monument, towards the very end, the city was giving its final approval. And it's then we faced some right-wing homophobes that went through the entire process of opposing us, because we were building it in a park. And they said that we would invite gay men to prance around in the bushes and that they were afraid for their children. Well, they were very much in your face, and they intimidated city officials. So we once had to go before a neighborhood council meeting in Lincoln Heights. There were 350 people there for that meeting. That's where we got death threats. And we had to live with those threats for, about a year or two. But it was so awesome because one of our spokespeople happened to have been one of our board members, and her name was Maria Elena Durazo, who now is a state senator, powerful labor leader at the time from Unite Here Local 11. In fact, that's where I met Cleve Jones. And she took to the podium her husband, who at the time was Miguel Contreras, who was the executive secretary for the LA County Federation of Labor. It's a really great story when you stop and think about, here you have some labor folks going up to support an AIDS monument over the objections of some loud homophobic people. And so early on, we created relationships if we didn't already have them. And we built in not only gay, lesbian people that were impacted, but labor leaders and church leaders that later on allowed us to have the largest faith-based HIV program in the country, which we had in Los Angeles, where we outreached to over 1,000 churches. And so it's about leveraging your community, bringing people together, and not necessarily dictating to them what was going to get done, but inviting them to a conversation and asking them to help get it done. It is really a great story about bringing people together and sharing your dream and allowing them to participate. And as we started actually bringing out the design for the AIDS monument, we invited those communities for those open meetings for their valuable input. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, for us at the AIDS Memorial Grove, 28 years ago when it was conceived and when the work began, it was obviously in the darkest days of the epidemic, where we were losing so many every week. And what really started, and what the impetus, as I shared before, is the AIDS Memorial is really about a volunteer community. And I've had the blessing of, in the early days of when AMP was being looked at, and the New York City Memorial, as well as the AIDS Monument in West Hollywood, some of their early leaders asked us, how have you been able to keep the community engaged to the degree to which you do? We've had over 250,000 volunteer hours dedicated to this space. The early years, it was obviously clearing and cleaning. But then as that began to evolve, it became part of what they were doing. They have continued to create a memorial for themselves and their community members, but they continue to till the ground and to work. And so as I have continued to share with everybody, is finding a way that you can continue to engage the community in creating something that is powerful for themselves. This has been exported, our model has been exported not only in San Francisco, but around the country, because we actually pay the city back 100% for all the wages and benefits and improvements, wages and benefits of our gardener, and we do all of the improvements ourselves. And our volunteer program has become so large that we actually now loan the volunteers out to different parts of the park system. And so I think that how we can engage community and individuals in the work, in the process of healing and of creating a space that they own, that they feel is theirs, will not only, sustain the work that we do, but I believe it represents what the AIDS activist work has always been. It's about community. It's about getting off the sidelines. So, the blessing is that we bring communities of faith, we bring youth, we bring so many different populations into that 10.5 acres to spend time working. We were blessed a year ago when my 4 partners on this call all came to San Francisco and spent time together with 150 volunteers that come every single month, except when there's COVID, to till in the ground and to share stories on either side of a shovel, because that's where the healing really happens, is by sharing stories. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, and last, I'll be brief. I actually participated in John's day of tilling the soil and cleaning up the grove up there, and it was such a beautiful, moving experience, and it's exactly a key way of building community. I really want to say that buy-in is something that we as executive directors, organizations earn. And that it's a part of our ongoing work. So we, like the other memorials, had formalized, outreach to communities and stakeholders. We did the same with a memorial design. There was a call for designs and a formal process, but the buy-in will continue. And every year we'll work with communities to maintain trust. And that's part of the responsibility of being an executive director and running these organizations.
Thank you, Tony. We have a couple of similar but slightly different questions that I'd like to bring up to see if you guys want to add anything. Dante Alacastra is asking how do you engage around the stories you're preserving for future generations? I know John mentioned the volunteers, but if Dave, Jason, you guys want to chime in on how do you engage community around the stories you're preserving?
Sure, I can talk briefly about a program that we've been working on for about almost half a year now. Unlike many memorials, we don't have any sort of names listed of those lost on site. The engraving on our site is actually a poem by Walt Whitman. So we were thinking about the ways to use language to memorialize both people, but also a time. And what we're working on right now is a project, which is a sound-based project, which we'll install at the memorial. Because I should also say, for those who haven't been, unlike the National AIDS Memorial, at its acreage, we are only about 1,600 square feet in the middle of a city. So it's a much different experience physically. And so we're looking to install a series of different speakers and kind of change the lighting to acknowledge that something's different at the memorial, and then use those speakers to be able to do a reading of names each day, and then a 1-hour program that reaches back into the history of the epidemic and pulls sounds from cinema and music and speeches and direct action oral histories and other things to create kind of a 1-hour experience of the last 40 years of the fight to end AIDS. And so that's one way we're doing that. Hopefully opening on around World AIDS Day of 2020.
Yeah, I I just want to say on the back end, or the other part of Nino's question, which was, I imagine there must be a lot of ideas or opinions as to what memorials are, and that is like an understatement, right? And so I think one of the things that we all struggle with is that we're not going to be, make everybody happy with what the memorials are and what we do. We try to be as much as we can to as many people as possible, but we're not going to be all things to everyone, and meet all those expectations. But I think that by moving forward with our intent to be inclusive, and by making memorials that have the trust of the community, and also with the intent of the heart of what we're trying to do, I think that people will see themselves in whatever our memorials are, and find something from that, which is the best I think we can hope for. So anyway, it was just to kind of comment on that. But in terms of our stories, I've mentioned before, we are doing this video collection, and so we're going out and with our story consultant, going and interviewing folks and editing those into videos that are posted on our website, on our YouTube channel now, but will also be on our new website, which will launch at the end of this month. And the other thing that this website will allow is for people to record themselves and then contribute to the website. So it'll allow people to add their own stories. And because, we're limited as to how many people we can go out and film in any given amount of time. So we're hoping to preserve stories that way, by building this collection online, and working with hopefully an institutional partner that will be able to hold those archives for us in perpetuity. So yeah, that's what we're doing.
Ms. Tony, I think one of the things that we share, that we have in common as memorials, is the storytelling and the capturing of testimonials. And in fact, our monument is called Stories, the AIDS Monument, because of how central that is to this work. We're all sort of looking for ways to sort of optimize being able to capture these stories, and my colleagues are explaining different ways that they're doing that. One unique thing that we're doing at Stories, the AIDS Monument, is we have a partnership with the AIDS Memorial on Instagram, and we are having some of those posts that are found at the AIDS Memorial on Instagram, we're bringing them to life by having the folks that actually submitted those posts do audio recordings of those posts, so that they're brief. They're 2 to 3 minutes long, and they're so beautiful. So they bring those stories to life because you hear, the poster's voice in them. So that's just one way that we're looking to be creative to get stories about the AIDS epidemic out there.
Yeah, we at the National AIDS Memorial, as I said, we launched a storytelling project about 7 years ago, and we feature each year in what's known as the Surviving Voices Project, a particular community. So as the question went, how do we engage community? Well, it's very clear to us that we have no business trying to tell somebody else's stories that is not our own, whether it be owned personally or ethnically or otherwise. And so we tend to create an advisory body that helps us not only to craft the storyline, but that also advises us on individuals that would be the appropriate faces of those surviving voices. So whether it was the hemophilia community or the trans community last year, these are all highly produced oral histories that are rest on our website. The other thing that we just launched, and we're very happy and pleased with, is a brand new web platform. And it sits and focuses on what we're calling 2020-40. So it's 2020, and this is the 40th year since the first diagnosed case. And if you visit our website at aidsmemorial.org, you will see how we are really bringing to the fore stories of many different individuals from many different walks of life that have great impact upon the epidemic, whether they're lost or whether they're still alive. So whether that's Sylvester, or whether that is Cleve, or one of the early founders of our organization. And what we're doing is we're bringing into that story the opportunity to bring in other supporting documents, whether it be articles or video, or perhaps a song that somebody may have written. And we're also asking the community to continue to add to that repository so that we continue to have this process of a dynamic, growing, and expanding engagement with individuals through leveraging technology. As we look to the next stage of this, we're really looking at how we can leverage cutting edge technology in the form of augmented reality and artificial intelligence. And my collaborating partners on this call, we have had conversations about how we may be able to partner in some of that dynamic content that we individually in our own locations connect to, but how we can share that within each other. And because we're connecting now to a global technology platform, is to share the stories and get a 360 story back around the world. So I think it's a matter of how you continue to engage and how you continue to sit in it in a manner that remains relevant and powerful and that connects to all the different dynamic places and stories that we must tell.
I wanted to also chime in. Every World AIDS Day for the last 27 years, we have on the evening, it's called Noche de las Memorias, the Evening of Memories, which is an open event. It's not a fundraiser. It's a community event where people are invited to share the memories of their lost loved ones. And those are powerful stories that we have been able to film and keep record of. And we're also gathering testimonies from folks because their stories will be told one day. It's very important, not only for them, but for the younger generation to know the tremendous loss that our community experienced from the devastation of AIDS.
I'd like to add something relevant to both what John and Richard both just said, that next year, as we hit the 40th anniversary of the first notification of what we now call HIV/AIDS, there is this whole new generation of young people who have absolutely no personal connection to what we went through. And I'm looking at all of your faces and seeing a certain degree of commonality among us, with some exceptions. And to those exceptions, I'm very glad you're here.
Yeah.
You know, in the early 1970s, when I was still a very young adult, I was interested in history. I was always interested in history. But when my grandparents went on and on about what they went through in the Depression, you know, it might as well have been the Pleistocene as far as I was concerned. So I think that one challenge that all of us are going to have to address, and I think that next year with the 40th anniversary offers us that opportunity to think very creatively about how we communicate to a generation that did not experience it at all. And I have been struck by the degree of ignorance that is out there. I actually got in quite a little argument with a younger person who overheard a conversation some friends and I were having in a cafe, where we were talking about the tens of thousands of gay men who had died in the Castro. And this young person said that we were exaggerating. And, you know, we had to really school him on that one. But it's not about finger wagging and lecturing. It's about really trying to find those creative ways of capturing young people's imaginations and connecting them. And I don't have much to offer in the way of suggestions about how we do that, but I will say that I am struck by how often, through my social media, through my website, or through interviews, I get inquiries from people in their 20s or 30s who have just discovered that their uncle or some other relative, someone who wasn't talked about, someone whose story was not shared at the family table, that has been uncovered to them, and they want to know. And I began this, you know, talking about the woman who reached out to me to talk about her brother. It is so common that I get these inquiries. Did you know my brother? Do you know who he was? He used to work at this place. Can you tell me where that is? I want to come to San Francisco. I'd like to see where he lived. So I think it's going to be a difficult task for all of us and very challenging, but in a good way, because it's going to require us all to remember how we were 40 years ago and come up with those creative strategies that can draw young people in and inform them and empower them and enlist them as this work goes on when we are no longer here.
And I jump in on Cleve's remarks there. I think you're absolutely right, Cleve. And part of the problem, I mean, part of this is structural, right? We don't, the AIDS epidemic and the history of AIDS activism is not taught in public schools. So if someone makes it to college, that may be the first time they're learning about artists like Gil Quadros or Paul Monet, or the history of ACT UP. So in some respects, it's not surprising because the history, the information has not been presented to these young folks. But I will say that in my work here at FAM for the last couple of years, what has struck me is meeting so many young artists, scholars, activists, people in nonprofits who are already working on making sure that these stories continue finding their place in that history. There's so much scholarship in art right now that's happening that by 20-somethings and 30-somethings around HIV/AIDS epidemic. I mean, one of the things all of us fear is that will these stories be forgotten? And I have to say that I feel confident that they won't because of how many people, first of all, our collective work as memorial organizations, but how many young people, and clearly many still have not, but there are so many who are taking this work on passionately. So I have a lot of optimism in younger generations that they're going to make sure that this history is not forgotten.
Yeah, and
I have a lot of faith in young people, and I'm grateful that I get to work with so many, but part of what concerns me about this particular part of it all is the speed and the speed with which our traditional neighborhoods are going away. So part of my concern is that the folks who are no longer going to be living in the so-called neighborhoods that had nurtured and given birth to so many of the best that we did are really going away. So I don't mean to be at all dismissive or critical of an entire generation. To the contrary, I have enormous hope in them, but I think we need to really keep that on the front burner. So Tony, that I'm encouraged by what you've said, and I hope we can all make sure that future generations do not just walk by these monuments and have no clue as to what they represent, which is something, that is a very real thing. It's amazing how short our attention span is as a culture and as a people.
I wanted to add here, I think I kind of agree with both of you. One is, in my meetings with the Centers for Disease Control, one of their biggest challenges last year was how do we start replacing folks in leadership positions in a lot of your nonprofit organizations, because the generation that really moved pushed the button on HIV and AIDS either have passed on or have retired. So they're having an issue, right, finding leadership. So that's on one case. On the other case, I want to also say how I am so pleased at the enormous amount of work that so many young people are engaged with in HIV prevention and testing today. I had a conversation, and I get emotional when I talk about my staff because I love them so much, with about 7 of my staff members today talking about some of the challenges in providing HIV testing under COVID. And we're talking about social marketing material. And a few of them are on this line today, and they created they're so creative in the messaging to other gay men and bisexual men about the need for HIV testing. And you see that passion in them. And I really appreciate the younger generation who have chosen to give of their life for this work, because I don't see HIV prevention and testing as a job. I see it as a ministry, you know, and they do such great work throughout this nation. If you've gone to the international AIDS conferences or the US Conference on AIDS, now it's US Conference on HIV, incredible young people. But there is that missing link between the history and the young people are on the ground. And that's where I think that we all need to fill those shoes, is to fill that and connect those links.
I think that is a wonderful place to pause our conversation. I think you guys have made my job incredibly easy. The questions have been wonderful and thought-provoking and engaging, and I want to thank all of our participants for submitting their questions. While we do not have time for any additional questions, if you'd like to learn more or have individual questions for our panel members, we will post all of their contact information and information about their organizations at the end of this forum, and you can contact them directly. But before we officially run out of time, and I would like to ask each of the panelists to share with us one final thought about how they will pull the lessons and the threats of the AIDS crisis to today and to the future. And I think I will couple it up with a great question from Nancy, who says, what keeps you going? So how are we going to pull the lessons and the threads of the AIDS crisis to today and to the future, and what keeps you going? John, you want to start on that one?
Sure. I first off want to thank all of you who have joined together today for this forum. Obviously, if you're on this call, you've been touched. You've been touched by the epidemic. You've been touched by the work that we all do, and you're committed to continuing to ensure that the lives of those lost are not forgotten. So I think it's most important that we continue in the tradition that the AIDS movement has brought us to the fore, and ask ourselves on a daily basis, what can I do to bring about meaningful change in my community? Whether that's doing something around HIV or AIDS or not, that's not the point. The point is that we've gotten engaged and we've gotten involved and we're doing something, because it's our work that helps others to follow. We need to be those examples for the youth that we just talked about to see, and we need to be stewards, and we need to help them to guide forward to improve the community. What keeps me going? This is all about healing. I'm still healing. I've been living with AIDS for over 20 years. I've lost so many. I lived in the middle of the Castro during the darkest of days. Many of us on this call walk on a daily basis with PTSD that's associated with what we went through, because we went through a war. So I think that the key is, what keeps me going is the niece of a man that died 30 years ago, who was going through her grandmother's closet after her passing and uncovered the quilt panel that her grandmother made for her uncle. And her grandmother put so much of her love into it, she could never let it go. And so at the time of passing, the family has now passed that on for us to ensure that it is forever remembered for the uncle that was lost. So again, thank you all.
I'm going to start with what keeps me going. And really one of the things that's kept me going is this group of people who are joining me here tonight. I started this job in June of 2019 and was the first person to ever have this job. My organization had been run by a board since its inception. And so I took on a new role, an undefined role, in a time where lots of things were happening in AIDS service organizations in New York and around the globe, and obviously more things have even happened since. And what's really kept me going is being able to share these ideas and bring our supporters and constituents and people who are interested in this history together through conversations like this, and through sharing ideas about how to diversify programming or do things together or share things that are happening across this country. And so that's been really beneficial to me. And I hope as we continue to do this work, that more and more organizations will be formed that will join us, that will be able to share more ideas and more programs with us, because I really believe that we fill this quite an important gap in history and sharing history with younger generations. And a lot of that is, I think, what are the strings that pulls everything together. You know, in the middle of a global pandemic, meant to launch programming, our first programs around the spring of this past year, we're on pause and we're kind of recalculating what we're doing. But I think once we are able to gather, and our space was built as a place to gather, we'll be able to find a multitude of ways to incorporate the stories of New Yorkers and others, to celebrate the lives of people we lost, to continue to celebrate and honor the work of activists and caretakers, which is so important to our mission and so important to the ongoing effort to end the epidemic. And that will be, I think, a thing that ties all of us together as organizations, but also all of our fellow citizens to the work that we're doing. And I just want to let you know, I don't know if he's back yet, but Tony crashed off. So if he's not here after Jason, the reason is he's trying to get back on. So thank you so much, and thank you for everyone for joining us this evening.
Yeah, as Dave mentioned, and I think in one of the questions in the chat that came up was asking about, how we're all getting through this current pandemic. And of course, we've all had many conversations about comparisons and contrasts between the AIDS pandemic and the current pandemic that we're all facing. And I know everybody participating in this call has had those conversations too. But I think it's really important. I think that's another reason why we're doing what we're doing, to remember and be inspired by the lessons from the AIDS crisis, and taking that to remember the extreme acts of kindness and the sacrifices people made and the brave actions people took and the hope that that was inspired. That's all things that we need to be reminded of and need to hold with us so that we can move forward and face what we're dealing with today and anything in the future. And I'll also echo what Dave said about feeling personally very grateful and inspired by working with this collaborative. And I think that that's also going to have a broader impact, that having this collaborative is going to allow many places to be stronger and have the support they need to do similar memorials, whether physical or digital or whatever it is, to keep people engaged and keep people reminded of what we all need to do to get through things together.
I'm coming back in for Tony because he is unfortunately unable to get back on the call. And he just wants me to let everyone know how much he appreciated the conversation and how much he's looking forward to collaborating in the future. So that's from Tony in LA.
So I just wanted to be the last one, as I went to Catholic school, so I had the last name started with a Z, so I was always the last one in class. And so I want to thank everybody the colleagues who are on the call, the staff who are supporting this call. Cleve, thank you. Everybody who hasn't had a chance to talk, but who's been chatting. Thank you for what you do. We don't know a lot about, but the fact that you're here in this safe space says a lot. For me, an AIDS monument is not just to remember someone who passed away from AIDS, but I walk away with a recommitment to social justice and an end to bigotry and discrimination, and to know that health care and health prevention is health justice. And so I will continue, and we as an organization will continue to support movements that support immigrant rights, refugee rights, workers' rights, trans rights, people who have suffered injustices. As we know, at a time when it was illegal to be openly gay, that that was part of our injustice at the time. And so many of our brothers died because there were laws that banned who they could be or who they were. And so that's what keeps me going today. And so whether it's a primary election or whether it's a new day coming in November, or whether there is gays being persecuted in Russia, that's what keeps me going. As long as we have the voice and we have the will and we have the experience, then we need to speak out. So thank you for allowing me to be part of this space, and for everybody who's been on this Zoom call.
That is a fantastic way to finish our call. Thank you. And I want to thank all of you who are out on your Zoom for allowing us into your space and sharing in this conversation with us. I hope you learned something new. I hope you do reach out to these AIDS memorials and make connections. We will send out the information, and there it is for all of you to see. We will also email you this, as well as the link to the presentation in case you missed anything and want to replay it for your teams. Let us know. We wish you all a very good night. Thank you for joining us, and stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Good night.